Hello everyone and welcome back to The Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, the Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm doing a Veloci-Ramp-Tor upgrade guide for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan commander decks. And this one was very cool, and I learned a lot looking through these decks, but honestly, if you're thinking about picking up any of these decks just for fun, they all seem like very solid decks, and it was very hard for me to decide what to cut. But let's start out by looking at the commander I think you should use in this deck, which is Patlaza Sun Favored. I believe that's how you say it. It's 2 generic red, green, white legendary creature dinosaur with whenever Patlaza Sun Favored or another dinosaur enters a battlefield under your control, you may discover X, where X is that creature's toughness. Do this only once each turn. So this is a very cool effect, and since a lot of dinosaurs have really big butts, you know, you're going to be able to actually discover higher mana cost cards than sometimes the cards you're casting are, which is a huge bonus, meaning you're going to be able to hit bigger things by spending less mana. So when I really wanted to look over this deck, I, wanted to focus on, well, how does it work? And basically, like I just explained, the bigger the butt, the bigger things you're able to get out with it, which is great. And there was a lot of things that I ended up cutting from this deck because I just didn't think it was necessary, or maybe it kind of was more on the line of the co-commander of this deck that really cares about enraging creatures, which is a very cool effect, but not something I really wanted to get into. So starting out, the first card I decided to cut is Arch of Araska, which is a land that has Ascend, which means if you have 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing. It can tap to add a colorless or 5 to tap to draw a card, activate only if you have the city's blessing. This deck does not really care about you drawing cards. You're going to be drawing plenty of cards, and with your commander, you're going to be getting stuff out for free or putting more stuff in your hand anyways. So I really thought 5 mana to draw a card in this deck is not great. You have access to green and white, which are going to be able to draw you a lot of cards if you put the right ones in there, which there are some really good card draw spells in here. So I just immediately took that out. There was no need to keep that in. Second up, we have Bellowing Aegisaur, which has an Enrage trigger, which is whenever Bellowing Aegisaur is dealt damage, put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. Now this is a great ability, but for 6 mana you get a 3/5 with this Enrage ability, and let's say you attack with it, it's probably going to get killed or not blocked at all, because 3 damage really isn't that much in the grand scheme of things. So his ability is not great unless you can, predictively trigger it over and over again. So for that reason, I just cut it. Next up, we have Death Gorge Scavenger, which is 2 and a green creature dinosaur. Whenever Death Gorge Scavenger enters a battlefield or attacks, you may exile target card from a graveyard. If it is a creature card exiled this way, you gain 2 life. If it's a non-creature card exiled this way, Death Gorge Scavenger gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So my biggest gripe with this card is I like its abilities. I like how you're able to get stuff with it, but it really doesn't work with our commander because we're spending 3 mana to get a 3/2 onto the battlefield, meaning we're only going to be discovering for 2 if this is the first one we cast each turn. I just wasn't a big fan. We already have so many great lower cost cards in this deck that I really didn't think it would be worthwhile to flip through half of your deck to find something small enough. So for that reason, I decided to cut it. Now next up, this is a decision that I'm not saying you should make, but this deck did have an abnormally high amount of lands based on the amount of mana dorks already in this deck. So I decided, out of the cards I decided to cut, you decide, but I chose Forest, Mountains, and Plains in this deck to remove because I think you started with 39 lands, and based on the amount of mana dorks and all the ramp in this deck, I really didn't think 39 lands was that necessary, especially because you kind of just move past them with your commander. It's not like you ramp out into them because Discover puts them into exile until, you find whatever you are going to cast or put in your hand, and then those go on the bottom. So I really didn't think it was that necessary to have that many, so you can decide based on my suggestions. Maybe you don't like some of my suggestions, throw a couple of these back in. But moving on to the regular cards again, we have Raging Regisaur, 2 red-green creature dinosaur. Whenever Raging Regisaur attacks, it deals 1 damage to any target. This again is another great enraged trigger creature. But the reality of the situation is you're paying 4 mana, and until your next turn, you're not really getting any value out of it unless you have this in an enraged deck. So I really didn't think that this was this good, and I just figured it needed cut. And on the same path, we have Raging Swordtooth, which is 3 red and a green creature dinosaur with trample. When Raging Swordtooth enters a battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each other creature. This one isn't as bad. I like the 5/5, I like the trample, and I like that it deals 1 damage to everything. But at the same time, this is an enraged trigger card. We don't have that many of these in this deck, and really it's not going to matter. You might actually end up killing some of your stuff because there are some weak things in this deck. So I'm not a huge fan of that, and I would just remove it right away. And lastly, same kind of concept, we have Raging Raptors, 2 and a green creature dinosaur within rage. Whenever Raging Raptors is dealt damage, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Now, I really like this effect. You know, obviously, I love ramping, especially when it's somewhat free. You know, you still have to cast this and deal damage to it, but there's not that many enraged triggers. I basically took all of them out of this deck, and as you can see, there's like 4 or 5, so it's really not that worthwhile. So these are the 9 cards I decided to remove. You know, I wonder if this matches with, you know, what some of you are thinking about removing. But now I want to move into the additions that I added to this deck, and just want to see how you think about, you know, the cards that I added as well. To kind of give a heads up, the kind of cards I included deal with flashing in creatures, because our commander has a very special line of text that says do this only once each turn. Not do this only once each your turns, but only once each turn. So if we're able to flash stuff out, we can basically double up, triple up on our discover triggers every turn, turning this into a very more powerful commander and a very, very threatening deck. So starting out, I have Arlen, the Pack's Hope. 2 red and a green legendary planeswalker Arlen with Daybound, which is a mechanic for Midnight Hunt that I'm not going to get into, but for +1, until your next turn, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash. And each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Alright, that's actually pretty cool. In addition to that, -3, you create 2 green wolf creature tokens, but when you flip her, you get Arlen, the Moon's Fury, and her take-up ability is generating mana, which is honestly pretty good. You know, we love getting mana, so that's even better. But then her 0 ability is until end of turn, Arlen, the Moon's Fury becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste, meaning that we could just swing out and attack for some damage without having to worry about our commander taking any. I see Arlen as a really interesting addition to this deck, you know, basically giving you the ability to cast stuff with flash and then getting it a little bigger when it enters, but I really liked this. Next up, I decided to add Cherished Hatchling for 1 and a green creature dinosaur. When Cherished Hatchling dies, you may cast a dinosaur spell this turn as though it had flash, and whenever you cast a dinosaur spell this turn, it gains when this creature enters the battlefield, you may have it fight another target creature. I think this is kind of really cool because if you have an opponent who's swinging a bunch of stuff at you, you can chump with this, cast a dinosaur at flash speed, and then have it fight something. And if this is after damage, maybe that creature is still weakened. I think that this is a great card to add in. I think, you know, it's pretty versatile. You're only going to get to use it once compared to Arlen, which you can use, you know, every turn basically, but I thought that was really cool. So next up, I have Embercleave, 4 red legendary artifact equipment with flash. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature you control, and when Embercleave enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, has double strike and trample, and is equipped for 3 normally. So the reason I like Embercleave in this deck and in any large creature, especially dinosaur deck, is that out of nowhere, you know, your 6/6 turns into a 7/7 with double strike, meaning it deals 14 damage and has trample, meaning that even if your opponents decide to block your big thing and they think they're safe, they're not. I've died to this card many times. I think this card goes in any big creature deck, and dinosaurs are definitely big creature decks. Now my 4th pick here is Gandalf the White. 3 white legendary creature avatar wizard with flash. You may cast legendary spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. If a legendary permanent or an artifact entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that triggers an additional time. So I believe we have a couple really great things that works awesome with Gandalf. First off, any of our legendary stuff, which there isn't too much, but there's a decent amount of legendary creatures in this deck, and maybe you're playing more legendary heavy if you're, you know, changing this up, so those can all cast at flash speed. But in addition, I believe this doubles our commander's triggers, because a dinosaur entering causes our commander to trigger, so it'll trigger an additional time, meaning we're doubling up on our discover triggers, which is super great. So this card is going to provide us with some really cool benefits, and I hope maybe there's some other legendary dinosaurs that I didn't really include in this deck. Maybe you have, you know, from previous Ixalan sets, or maybe you're adding in to really take advantage of that. So next is a card that I love. I found it when I was designing some Pioneer decks, but it's called Savage Summoning. It's a single green instant, which Savage Summoning can't be countered. The next creature card you cast this turn can be cast as though it had flash. That spell can't be countered, and that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. which is very cool because if you're trying to ramp out a certain dinosaur and you're worried about an opponent, countering it or doing whatever to it, this protects it. This makes it so it can't be countered. This spell can't be countered. Only spells like maybe Remand or Reprieve can kind of put this back into your hand. But this ramps out something and it's bigger when it enters, and it's just all around good. It's everything you want to do. It lets you do it at any time. So I think that this is the perfect card. So my next pick here, number 5, I'm kind of on the fence about. This might be one of those picks where I say throw in that basic land instead of this, but it's called Veneral Equinox. It's a very old card from Akkadian Masks, and it's 3 and a green enchantment. Any player may play creatures and enchantment spells at any time he or she could play an instant. The issue with this is that this is one of those global enchantments, right? Where it affects everybody on the board, not just you. So my kind of issue with this is I'm worried that if you have this out, your opponents are going to be able to take advantage of it just like yourself, but this does let you cast stuff at flash speed at any point. So that is very powerful, and it might be worth including, but that's up to you. Do you want to give your opponents that ability as well, or are you sticking to that? This is especially not good, obviously, in Enchantress decks because they can just wait till it's right before their turn or on an opponent's turn to fill up their hand with stuff, and then they never have to discard at the end of their turn. So this is very, very powerful. Be careful with this. Next up, we have another Planeswalker here with Vivien, Champions of the Wild. 2 and a green, legendary Planeswalker Vivien. You may cast creature spells as though they had flash. +1 until your next turn. Up to 1 target creature gains vigilance and reach. Or -2, look at the top 3 cards of your library, exile 1 of them face down, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. For as long as it remains exiled, you may look at that card and you may cast it if it's a creature spell. So Vivien gives you some pretty cool benefits here, but really we care about that flash. It's 1 mana cheaper than Arlen. It's going to let us cast things out at flash speed, which could be pretty good. I like this Planeswalker, and yeah. So next up, we have Winding Canyons. This is a land from, I don't remember what this is from, maybe Weatherlight, but it is a old land that says tap to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or 2 and tap. Until end of turn, you may play creature cards whenever you could play instants. So basically, this just gives your creature spells flash, and the fact that this is a land means that it's going to be pretty well protected because there isn't a lot of land removal in Commander, and for 2 mana, you can just cast stuff at flash speed. So you do have to pay a little bit of a tax, where some of these other things, it's kind of just built into their ability, but that 2 mana could be really, really powerful. And lastly, card number 9 is Yeva, Nature's Herald. 2 green legendary creature elf shaman with flash. You may cast green creature spells as though they had flash. Notably, it is only green creatures, but I did look through the deck before I decided to include this, and a majority of your dinosaurs are green or have green in them. So there's only a few kind of outliers where this isn't going to work, but most likely you'll have at least 1 green dinosaur in hand if you have one of these other ones anyways. So Yeva is one of my favorite cards. I did a Commander deck around her if you want to check that out, and she is super, super cool. But tell me what you think. Is flash a good strategy for this commander? Do you like taking double advantage of the once per turn because you can do it, on your opponent's turns? Or is this just a big mistake? Should I have not done that at all? Was there another way to build this deck? Please leave it down in the comments down below. I would love to see that. In addition, if you aren't subscribed, I'm going to be doing a upgrade guide of all the decks this week. So please check that out if you're interested in seeing those, or maybe share it with a friend. I'd really appreciate that. And if you'd leave a like, that would just help me out so much. So thank you. And today's Scryfall card of the day is Wind Shear. As the winds abate, there was a shower of dragon scales, then nothing more. Azawar, the unruly wind. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.